Hi there, I'm Mark and welcome to Book Ramble. And this one is about the Watchmen. Or at least the first chapter of 12. I won't necessarily do 12 episodes, but the first chapter, there's a lot to talk about just in the setup. And first of all, look at this. I don't know if you can see the Rorschach images changing. It's an amazing piece of artwork. Beautiful. Which obviously you won't get in the cartoon itself. This is considered one of the greatest books ever written. And this image here, with the happy face and the blood, is very famous if you were around in the late 80s, early 90s. The whole of the series is set in America, of the alternate timeline of the 1980s. And we have these crusaders, these vigilantes who dress up like the Cape Crusaders of old. And in fact, it references the first ever Superman. But this timeline differs, and we get a set of people who become like the Night Owl and whatever. They dress up in costumes as vigilantes. And Rorschach is one of them. But it was done by two Englishmen, Alan Moore and I think it's Dave Chester Gibbons. There's an old adage, isn't there? Often you need somebody outside of a system to be able to look in and give a critique. Because generally people inside a box can't see what the box is like. When I left the UK to come to live in New Zealand, it became very apparent very quickly that I brought a lot of Britishness with me, which I don't necessarily now have. And if I was to go back and live, I would probably, no doubt, take a lot of Kiwiness with me, which won't be appropriate to where I live. It's just the way it is. And if you live in the decaying New York City of this time, it probably required a non-American to be able to give the overall feel and flavour of what this is about. So it's very interesting in that regard. The first thing you see is a clock ticking towards midnight, and it's because, and I never picked this up until I happened to read Dave Gibbons writing about the production of this, and it was influenced by lyrics of Bob Dylan, which Dave says is 1966 masterpiece Desolation Row. It's not a song I know. It says, at midnight all the agents and the superhuman crew come out and round up everyone who knows more than they do. And that led to the actual creation of Watchmen. At dawn my lover comes to me and tells me of her dreams, with no attempts to shovel the glimpse into the ditch of what each one means. The New York Times book review said the would-be heroes of Watchmen have staggeringly complex psychological profiles. That's true. And the greatest piece of popular fiction ever produced. And that's by Damon Lindelof, the Watchmen TV series creator, and also Lost co-creator. So this is important in terms of modern culture. So what's it about? Well, I can give you the overall of where it goes. Effectively, the world is turning to custard. It's a alternate timeline in which we're in New York City, and we begin with Rorschach's journal. There's been a murder, apparent murder, where someone's been pushed through very thick glass on a high-level high-rise, and we see some police at the scene. And they give their ideas as to who it is. They don't know the person concerned. There's rumours. And potentially they kind of guess what's happened to the gentleman. He would have been a big, burly man, well able to take care of himself. But at midnight, all the agents. Rorschach comes in. And you see straight away there's something not quite right with this fella because of what he's wearing, that mask. But he knows where to look, and he finds hanging there discarded costume. The costume of a man, Mickey Flanagan said. So It's beautifully realized, and this world is decaying. This is the height of, in our timeline, the Cold War. You follow this guy, and you realize that Rorschach is one of the main characters because we're following him. It's his writings, really. It's his thoughts. But he's vicious. I mean, this guy is not pleasant. At first, he goes to someone's hideout where we see a machine here. It's a guy called the Night Owl, as we find out. Why the Night Owl? Well, because he dresses up as a night owl. There he is. But what's great about this, you find out later he's not the first. He took on the mantle of the Night Owl when the original Night Owl got too old. So in fact, we're seeing multi-generations of people who decide to become vigilantes. Why? At the back end of chapter 1, we get the first person account of Under the Hood. And it's the reason why a cop, as he grows up, decides to become a vigilante. And he references his family, his upbringing in the 1930s. He says here that he was influenced by the Superman comics. There's somebody else who is acting as a vigilante already, and that influences him to do the same. He says here, a tall man built like a wrestler who wore a black hood and cape and also wore a noose around his neck. This extraordinary being had crashed in through the window of the supermarket while a robbery was in progress and attacked the man responsible with such intensity and savagery that those not disabled immediately were only too willing to drop their guns and surrender. Connecting this incident of masked intervention with its predecessor, the papers ran the story under a headline that read simply, Hooded Justice. The first masked adventurer outside comic books had been given his name. Reading and rereading that news item, I knew that I had to be the second. I'd found my vocation. So throughout the story, and I'm not going to be talking about this because I'll do, again, a follow-up or two, we get to see some characters, such as Rorschach, who goes into a sleazy dime bar in town. This guy's an informer. Asks some information of him, and again, there's going to be spoilers now. He deals with him when he doesn't think he answers quickly enough. He kind of breaks his fingers. This is not a pleasant man, but he's standing up for justice. So you immediately start to get these questions being asked. Who watches the Watchmen? If there's a set of people who set themselves up as militia, vigilante, where are they getting their authority from? If no one can stop them, then who's in control of them? What happens to them? And you get a very quick insight that things may have happened before we meet Rorschach. Like all good creations, it starts in media res, in the middle of the action. The police don't know what's happening. Rorschach comes in. He's part of that elite that were created pre-war and exited throughout the war and go onto the streets at night to get a city that's out of control. Crime is rampant, and these guys are going to help the general citizens by picking on those who pick on them. But what are these people like? Who would do such a thing? What's their psychology? What makes them want to become such and hide their faces at the same time? And Rorschach is an interesting psychological thing because a Rorschach is an image created by psychologists, that ink blots, so to speak, that are given to people to assess how they respond. What do they see in here, and does that mean anything? Very common, I guess, in the time in which this was set, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. I don't think it's common now, because obviously people can lie. And once you know that you're being asked, what do you see in this image? Well, you can over-embellish, you can try and say things you think the psychologist wants to hear, and so on. But generally, you'll look at these Rorschachs and you think, oh, there you go, there's a butterfly, or there's something else. And supposedly, psychologists used to believe that it could open up to view a person with psychotic tendencies. Rorschach, by having this on his face, that tells you a lot about his character. The world for him is plainly black and white, and he will go out of his way to exact or get information in very nefarious means, ways which the police couldn't openly do. And is the case as he starts going around asking people and telling fellow vigilantes who have got used to wearing costume vigilantes, that now they may be leading nice lives, pleasant lives. There's this made-up act in this story, this world, in which it made costume vigilantes no longer needed. But they're still around, they're still looking back with sadness on the days in which they could or were seen as useful. But those days are gone. But chapter 1 is interesting because it immediately sets up the fact that we're not dealing with normal people. We've met Rorschach, Night Owl, Ozymandias, and some have very strong powers, of course. Equipment or physicality, they're quite strong. But we then go to a place where Rorschach gets into it. It's a guarded and secret military installation, because obviously this act that brought in a rule to say that these guys are no longer wanted, well, that didn't stop the government still using them. And we meet here Dr. Manhattan, who's plainly humanoid or human-shaped, but not quite human. Here we see he's very tall, but then he comes down to normal size. And he has the ability to alter matter, not just in himself, because he does something to Rorschach just to put him somewhere else at the flick of a finger. So something's happened that has created a character that has got beyond human abilities, living in a world that's plainly at a crossroad of culture and is decaying. And as this woman says here, who's one of them, they go out for a meal, and it's the first time she's had a proper meal in a long time. So it's quite intriguing at this point. Where is this world going? Where does it go? Now, I know the story because I've read it multiple times. I think for this particular dive, it's just to highlight the wonderful graphic art, the colours. The colouring is superb. And we're not dealing with characters that are really for children. This is deep stuff that's being talked about. Who would do such a thing to put on a costume, hide their identity, and then go out and beat up criminals, then bask in the glory that's given to them, then potentially work together, then potentially work for a government that then shuts them down when they're not needed, but then secretly keeps on keeping a few working on behalf of developing weaponry or whatever? What do these people themselves think? How do they react to the world that's happening around them? If they're no longer needed, how do they deal with that? That psychosis. Abandoned, and yet they keep their trophies hidden. So straight away, you understand that this is a very, as it says here, a deep psychological profile of what it is to have immense power, but then potentially lose it. And that's just in the first chapter. I wanted to give away because I want to talk about this later. And this is the most fascinating character, I think, because he gets sickened with things and he just disappears off planet. I think, if I remember, because I'm not read it for decades, he goes off to the moon. Will they be called back when they're needed? That kind of thing. So you could read this on various levels. You can just read it as a story, a good yarn of people beating people up and they've got these motivations and back and forth. You could also read it as deep ethics. Should these people have rules to keep them in check? Or are they allowed to go out and do what they want regardless? So long as they're doing it to an enemy, is that okay? But what if they turn against us? How does the government control these people? How do they weaponize them? Deeper, what kind of psychology is being enacted on the society in which these people exist, who are then perhaps hated, seen with suspicion, we don't want them anymore, but then will we call them back if we do need them, and so on and so on and so on. Deep levels to this that really requires multiple readings. In fact, having restarted this, I'm picking up stuff now that I can't remember I realised at the time. The Rorschach one, specifically, as I've talked about. These individual creations work really well. One or two, if I remember, back when it's set in the 1940s and 50s, if I remember, they're slightly weak because they're given... Well, I thought they were weak when I first read it, but I'm not sure that will be the case now. If I remember, there's one scene where one guy beats upon a woman, which has a profound effect on all the others, and so on. I think there's a rape. So we're dealing with deep, darkest depths of the human self. And why are these popular? And this is Rorschach here with the red hair. Why are these kind of comics perpetually popular? What does it emote in the reader? And this has always been a fascination for myself. So when you think of the original Action comic and the revealing of Superman, I think he's famously holding up that car. It's like you see these movies in which there is a protagonist or protagonists, and they can't do it themselves. They need someone beyond themselves to come and help them. And that is like a hero. That's the hero motif. But what if the hero is hidden in some strange costume? One of the great things about the Batman is when he turns up for the first time, he causes the bejeebers in people because he looks different. But he's just an ordinary man with some weird armor and equipment because Bruce Wayne can afford it. What do we see in people who do that? What, is it like somebody beyond ourselves that can come and help us? But because these are really always deep, it's the questions beyond that, simplistic understanding that we need these people. There's a scene here. One of the female characters gets to the moon, can't breathe, and is begging Dr. Manhattan to help her breathe, and it takes a while to get there. The power that these hold and whether they're going to help people. It's a wonderful thing to explore. And this, can you hear that? It's like velvet, wonderful. This is a great example of how you can take any story, complex characters, put them into a world, and yet make it seem both simplistic and deep at the same time. I adore this as a story because it elevated, in my mind, graphic novels and what it could be, what it should be. Now, that's not to say anything that came before wasn't of the same depth or psychological rigor, although I believe a lot of people do say that. Since the Watchmen, we have had Batman the Killing Joke, V for Vendetta, and Green Lantern. And they are a lot more dark and questioning of the human self. So there's a lot more in this than you would think on first glance. I mean, look at that machinery there. That there is the Night Owl's vehicle. Brilliantly realised and rendered. And in fact, what's great about this is at the back, they give you how it's put together. Original renderings, some colorized imagery that's different to what's in the book, the laying out of pages and how it's done and built up over time. Also how the two collaborators would talk back and forth, I believe, on how they should show things. It's just so beautifully done. Very thoughtful. And again, it's one that after a brief period you may want to go back into. So The Watchmen. I'm going to spend some time with this. I'll be able to, I think, if I read the next 2 chapters, then the follow-up, talk more about where the story's going, how it unfolds, twists and turns, and whatever. Honor is like the hawk. Sometimes it must go hooded. Great stuff. The Watchmen. Ta-ta for now.